Throughout history and across various cultures, there have been eerie tales of phantom door knocking. Mysterious raps at the door that seem to come from nowhere, often associated with the supernatural. These knocks are sometimes believed to be harbingers of otherworldly visitors, ranging from spirits to more malevolent entities. One particularly unsettling belief is that 3 knocks at the door signify the presence of a spirit or a demon. These auditory apparitions are said to mock the Holy Trinity, presenting a dark omen to those who hear them. The eerie phenomenon has been the subject of countless folklore, where the unseen knocker often leaves behind a lingering sense of dread and unanswered questions. There's something comforting about having the house to myself, or at least there usually is. It's not often my brother and his fiancée are both away, and while I miss their company, I enjoy the rare quiet. Tonight, however, the quiet feels heavier, as if the old house itself is holding its breath. I'm curled up on the couch, absently scrolling through a streaming service while the low hum of the TV fills the living room. It's late, but not unreasonably so. The kind of late where shadows pool in the corners, and even the faintest sound seems amplified. That's when I hear them. Footsteps. They're soft at first, just a faint tap that could easily be dismissed as the house settling. This place is old, and noises like that aren't uncommon. In fact, I've even heard footsteps before when sitting with my brother and his fiancée. We'd all brushed it off with a shrug and a joke about the friendly ghost, but tonight, they're louder, sharper, more deliberate. Telling myself it's nothing, I decide it's time for bed. The second floor is mine, while my brother and his fiancée keep their bedroom on the first. The separation is nice, though it feels unnerving as I ascend the creaky staircase, leaving the bright, cozy living room behind. As I reach the top landing, another sound stops me in my tracks. Footsteps again, but this time they're coming from downstairs. Before I can react, I hear a new noise, someone rattling the front door handle. My heart pounds in my chest. The door is locked, but the sound of it being tested makes my blood run cold. I tiptoe to the upstairs living room window, pressing myself against the wall as I peer outside. The porch is dimly lit. The yard drenched in shadows. I can't see anyone. The rattling stops, leaving behind an eerie silence. Swallowing hard, I tell myself to stay calm. Maybe it was just a neighbor or someone confused about which house they were visiting. I force myself to breathe and decide to investigate. As much as I want to stay upstairs, something compels me to head down. My brother's room is the most logical place to check first. Descending the stairs feels like walking into a trap, every creak of the wood betraying my movements. I pause outside his door, pressing my ear against it. There's no sound now, just the suffocating quiet. I turn the knob slowly and push the door open, the faint creak echoing in the stillness. The room is dark, just as they left it. I fumble for the light switch and flip it on, revealing nothing but the neatly made bed and folded laundry. Relief is fleeting. From the garage, a sound, soft but unmistakable, shatters the silence. It's the scrape of something shifting. The garage connects to the hallway through an internal door, just a few feet away. My stomach twists as I approach. I open the door and flick on the light, stepping inside. The garage is as cluttered as ever. Boxes stacked against the walls, old tools leaning haphazardly in a corner. As I step further in, a plank of wood suddenly falls to the floor with a crash. I jump, my heart racing as my eyes dart to the source of the noise. It's just a loose piece of wood, nothing sinister, but it's enough to convince me I've had enough investigating for one night. I head back upstairs, eager for the safety of my room. But as I reach the top of the stairs, I freeze. The back door is wide open. The sight sends a chill down my spine. I know I locked it. I checked it before heading downstairs. The night outside is still and quiet, no wind to speak of. I rush to the kitchen, grab a knife, and lock the door again, my hands trembling. The thought of an intruder is far more terrifying than any ghost story. I start moving through the house, calling out loudly, "I have a knife. You better get out." The footsteps return, this time downstairs, echoing faintly in the silence. My bravery evaporates. I retreat to my bedroom and lock the door, clutching the knife tightly. I dial my sister. By the time my brother and sister arrive, I'm on edge but trying to stay rational. My brother inspects the back door lock and steps outside to check for footprints in the muddy ground. He returns with a shrug. Nothing, he says. No sign of anyone. Still, the next day he replaces the lock. Better safe than sorry, he tells me. I try to convince myself it was all in my head, just the creaks of an old house and a gust of wind that I somehow missed, but I can't shake the feeling that something or someone was there that night. It was 3 a.m. when I felt the soft tug on my blanket, followed by my teenage son's urgent whisper, "Mum, it's happening again." I blinked awake, trying to process his words through a haze of sleep. His face was pale, his eyes wide with worry. "What's happening?" I asked, sitting up. "The knocking," he said, his voice tight. "It's been happening for weeks, but tonight it's so loud I couldn't ignore it anymore." I frowned, my grogginess fading. My son wasn't one to overreact, and the seriousness in his tone made my stomach twist. Grabbing my phone, I opened the security camera app and pulled up the live feed for the front door. The porch, illuminated by the motion light, was empty. "There's no one there," I said, turning the screen toward him. He hesitated, staring at the feed, then back at me. "But I heard it, Mum. I swear. It's not just in my head." I placed a hand on his arm, trying to sound reassuring. "Maybe it's the wind or an animal brushing against the door. Houses make strange noises sometimes, especially at night." He nodded reluctantly, but didn't look convinced. As he returned to his room, I lay back down, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come easily. The following night, I couldn't shake the unease. I kept the phone on my nightstand, the security app open and ready. My son had gone to bed early, though his tense expression said he was bracing for another restless night. At exactly 3 a.m., I woke with a start. A loud, deliberate knock echoed through the house, sharp and insistent. I froze, my heart racing. I grabbed my phone, fumbling with the security app. The live feed flickered on, showing the porch as empty as ever. The motion light was on, casting harsh shadows across the space, but there was no sign of anyone. Then came another round of knocks, impossibly loud and aggressive, shaking the door and its frame. I jumped, my hands trembling as I stared at the screen. Nothing. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I threw on a dressing gown and crept toward the front door, my heart pounding with every step. As I reached the door, I hesitated, pressing my ear against it. The silence on the other side was almost mocking. Slowly, I turned the lock and cracked the door open, peering outside. The porch was empty, the yard beyond still and undisturbed. The air was cold, but there wasn't even a breeze to explain the noise. I closed the door, locking it tightly before retreating to the kitchen for a glass of water. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the glass. The next few nights were quiet, but I couldn't relax. Every creak of the house, every groan of the wind, set my nerves on edge. My son seemed calmer, but I could tell he was waiting for it to happen again. It did. Friday night, the knocking returned, louder and more forceful than ever. The sound was deafening, as if someone was slamming their fists against the door. My son burst into my room, his face pale with fear. "You hear it, don't you?" he asked, his voice almost drowned out by the relentless banging. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling to open the security app. The live feed appeared, but something was wrong. The screen flickered, static rippling across the image. The motion light was on, but the porch was a blur of distortion. I stared at the screen, willing it to stabilize. The knocking grew louder, shaking the very walls of the house. The feed dissolved into complete static. Then the app crashed, the screen going black. My son and I stood frozen, the pounding on the door reverberating through the house. Then, as suddenly as it began, it stopped. We didn't move for what felt like an eternity, too afraid to even breathe. When I finally mustered the courage to open the door, there was nothing. No footprints in the damp earth outside, no sign of anyone having been there. The next day I called a professional to replace the security system entirely. I told myself it was just a glitch, just a coincidence. But deep down, I knew better. The knocking hasn't returned since, but every night at 3 a.m., I find myself lying awake, holding my breath, listening, waiting. It started as a quiet night. The house was empty except for me, which wasn't unusual. Sam was visiting his family, Claire had some work retreat, and Mark was staying at his girlfriend's place. I didn't mind being alone. I'd always told myself I liked the quiet. I was half watching some old sitcom, letting the noise fill the room, when it happened. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was sharp and deliberate, cutting through the stillness. My whole body tensed. At first I thought maybe I'd imagined it, but when the knocks came again, I muted the TV and listened. I stood up, phone in hand, and walked to the front door. My heart was already racing as I peeked through the peephole. Nothing. No one was there. Probably a delivery for the wrong house, I muttered to myself, trying to push the unease away, but it was nearly midnight. Who delivers at this hour? I unlocked the door and opened it, the porch light casting long shadows on the empty street. "Hello," I called out. No answer. Just the windless night staring back at me. I closed the door, locked it again, and went back to the couch. But my focus was gone. My eyes stayed on the screen, but my ears were trained on the quiet house, listening for, I wasn't sure. Then it happened again. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was louder, more insistent. I jumped off the couch, anger and fear bubbling in my chest. Seriously, I muttered. I marched to the door and yanked it open, fully expecting to catch some prankster in the act. The porch was empty, no one on the street, no movement at all. "Very funny," I shouted into the void. "Get lost." I slammed the door shut, turning the lock with more force than necessary. As I stepped away, the sound came again, this time right in front of me. Knock, knock, knock. It came from the other side of the door, just inches away. My breath caught, and I froze. Slowly I turned back to the door, hand trembling as I reached for the knob. But I didn't open it this time. Instead, I raised my fist and knocked back, 3 knocks, mirroring the sound. I held my breath. For a moment, there was silence. Then bang, bang, bang. The reply was deafening, each knock vibrating through the door. Adrenaline coursed through me. I knocked again, harder this time, letting my anger drown out my fear. The silence that followed was absolute. I stayed there, my hand on the door, heart pounding in my ears. When nothing else happened, I let out a shaky breath and started back toward the living room. That's when I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. This time it was at the back door. I stopped in my tracks, every hair on my body standing on end. The back door was mostly glass. I could see the backyard from the hallway, and as I approached I glanced out. There was no one there, just darkness beyond the glass, the faint glow of the kitchen light reflecting back at me. "Enough," I shouted, my voice cracking. "I don't know who you are, but this stops now. I'm calling the police." I stood there, waiting for an answer. A laugh, footsteps, anything. But the house was silent again. For the rest of the night, I sat in the living room with all the lights on, my phone clutched tightly in my hand. The knocking didn't come back, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there. A couple of hours passed and exhaustion finally set in. I decided to head to bed, though I knew sleep wouldn't come easily. I locked my bedroom door out of habit, climbed into bed, and pulled the blankets up to my chin. It took a long time to drift off. My body was tense, my ears straining for any sound. And then, just as I was on the verge of sleep, knock, knock, knock. I shot upright, my heart hammering. This time the sound wasn't at the front door or the back door. It was coming from my closet. I stared at the closet door, my mind racing. I told myself it wasn't real, that I was imagining things. But before I could convince myself, the knock came again, louder this time. I'd had enough. Adrenaline pushed me out of bed, and I stormed to the closet, yanking the door open. Nothing. The closet was empty, just my clothes hanging limply on their racks. But as I stood there, trying to make sense of it, several hangers jerked violently, dropping clothes onto the floor. I stumbled back, staring at the fallen clothes. My hands shook as I closed the door, shoving it shut harder than necessary. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I stayed on my bed, the lights on, my back against the wall. The knocking didn't come again, but the silence was just as loud, just as suffocating. By morning, I told myself it was over. The knocking seemed to stop after that. I didn't tell my housemates about it, but I always made sure I wasn't home alone after that.